Good morning, everyone. I'm Nancy Anderson, and I'm here to welcome you to our Community Solar, Making It Happen in New York. This is the first of a two-panel series, and we're here today to get the big picture on community solar developments in New York City and New York State. We're here to hear from our thought and policy leaders and the folks who are making it happen right now, which also means the folks who really are, in many ways, the pioneers making the path by doing it. Before we begin, just for all of you Zoomers out there, just a couple of bits of housekeeping. This is a 1-hour event. The event is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube early next week. For those of you who would like to ask our panelists questions, obviously, please use the Q&A button down in the lower part of your screen. Q&A, we will save the live Q&A for the latter part of our event. And if speakers want to be able to respond to specific Q&A by text, of course, that's an option too. This is not a panel about doing a deep dive into the climate crisis. I assume that really everyone here today knows we're having a climate crisis and know that action and smart action is urgent and the clock is ticking. We are all here knowing that our electric power system must be decarbonized. While the power supply is not the only source of greenhouse gas emissions, it's obviously a really critical one in places like New York City. Our buildings, which are still much too fossil fueled, are a major source of headache. So our goal today and the goal of our speakers is to see how to decarbonize our power supply. The value of community solar, we see it as shaped by its contributions to 5 thematic areas: resiliency, reliability, affordability, and the social equity scalability nexus. Before diving in, I would like just this opportunity to introduce our speakers, and I'll just do it alphabetically. Luke Falk is the Vice President of Energy Ray and is responsible for the development of Clean Path New York. Energy Ray is thank you, Luke. Energy Ray is an independent New York company focused on solving complex challenges and providing clean energy solutions. The team at Energy Ray has expertise in infrastructure, engineering, and real estate. At related companies, Luke's energy practice had included responsibility for developing distributed and renewable energy generation projects. Jasmine Graham, Jasmine, give us a wave, is the Energy Justice Policy Manager at We Act for Environmental Justice, responsible for strengthening and advancing the organization's energy policies. They joined from Sustainable Westchester, where they served as Westchester Power Program Manager and developed initiatives to create and promote local renewable generation and community scale efficiency. Juan Pata, good morning, is the Director of Community Solar at Solar One, a New York City-based environmental educational nonprofit. Solar One's community solar program facilitates the development of community solar projects by providing technical assistance to community-based partners. Solar One launched 2 community solar projects in 2021. Of relevant importance is Community Power, a 1.2 megawatt project serving nearly 500 LMI households. These numbers are really beginning to grow. It's very exciting. Finally, Chris Rogers. Chris, give us a wave. Thank you. Is project manager at NYSERDA's New York Sun team, with a focus on programs and initiatives that benefit low and moderate income households. In particular, he manages the Affordable Solar and Storage Pre-Development and Technical Assistance Program. That's a mouthful. And the financial incentives that support projects built on multi-family affordable housing. Before joining NYSERDA, Chris was at the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, where his work concentrated on electricity regulatory issues and international development. I'm Nancy Anderson. I'm the executive director of Nancy Anderson Associates. Previously, I was the executive director of the Salon Foundation, and I'm a co-producer of today's event. Rob Crowderoff, my co-producer of this panel series and partner in crime, has been doing advanced innovative renewable energy services through his firm since its inception in 2013. With more than 50 community solar projects in development across New York City and statewide community solar subscriber acquisition campaigns, his firm promises to deliver benefits to all New Yorkers, especially disadvantaged communities. And Rob will be serving as today's moderator and general keeper of the Q&A process. So Rob, let me turn it over to you, and in advance, thank you to everybody who's here today.
Thank you, Nancy. Now I'd like to set the panel up. I'm very excited about the statewide really intersectionality of the speakers. Right now, we are at a critical and exciting moment around solar policy in New York State, which reflects the nearly 200 RSVPs for this event across the state and country and also across sectors. Community solar is nothing short of a resounding success in New York. To date, 940 megawatts have been built statewide with a pipeline of 2.4 gigawatts, enough to power more than 430,000 homes. And Governor Hochul has committed to nearly doubling the amount of distributed solar across the state to 10 gigawatts from a 6 gigawatt goal by 2030. While the vast majority of existing community solar projects are large ground mount facilities in upstate New York, successful models also exist and merit attention to scale in New York City. Today, we're taking a statewide perspective, given the interconnectedness of New York's energy ecosystem. Importantly, policies are presently under development for how to achieve this 10 gigawatt goal. And due to the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, the state has a goal that 40% of related investments benefit disadvantaged communities. There's no better time than the present to reflect and learn on what has worked, what challenges have arisen, and what it will take to scale successful models. So with this as a backdrop, we bring to you 4 critical voices in community solar, as Nancy just introduced, to provide the flow. First, Chris will provide a statewide perspective on community solar programs, including efforts to benefit disadvantaged communities. Next, we'll turn to transmission. Although most renewable energy being constructed is in upstate New York, we in New York City are not able to access the vast majority of these electrons because of grid constraints. So second, Luke Falk from Energy Ray will be discussing an ambitious effort to develop a massive transmission line, enabling New York City to utilize a much greater share of clean energy produced upstate. Third, we'll turn to Jasmine Graham, who will be discussing successful projects in New York City advanced by WE Act, providing a critical environmental justice perspective to our discussion. And finally, Juan from Solar One will be discussing a portfolio-wide community solar project, as Nancy mentioned, that they developed with NYCHA, so that we may further learn from implementation. So without further ado, Chris, I will turn the mic over to you.
Thanks, Rob, and confirm that you can hear me all right. Excellent. So once again, my name is Chris Rogers. I'm a project manager at NYSERDA, and I want to go through a brief overview of the way that NYSERDA sees community solar and what programs we're doing to support. So for those who are unaware of what, so I work at NYSERDA within the solar initiative, which is referred to as New York Sun. And that program primarily administers incentives and programs that are intended to drive growth of the entire solar industries, from community solar, large scale solar, commercial industrial projects, all the way down to residential projects that most people are most intimately familiar with. And you people on this call may have solar panels on their own home. And in the last 5 years or so, the overall goals of the New York Sun, the solar program, they've grown pretty much in parallel and driven largely by the growth of community solar in the state of New York. A few years ago, the goal of NYSERDA was to install 3 gigawatts of solar by 2022. That changed last year to trying to install 6 gigawatts of solar by the end of 2025, alongside other goals that were really put into the record by the Climate Act. And now we're in the process of a new proposal and a new proceeding that's before the Department of Public Service, where the new proposed goal is 10 gigawatts of distributed solar in the state of New York by 2030. And as you see that the way that goal has gone up, it's really paralleled the growth of community solar. Just a few years ago, community solar, there were only around, we're counting in the kilowatts of capacity that were installed each year. But in 2020, New York ranked #1 in the nation in terms of community solar installs. I think it was around 300 megawatts or so. And we've seen that growth continue. We're still totaling up the numbers, and we'll see if we keep the title going into 2021. Excuse me. So we were #1 for 2020, and we'll see what we do for 2021. And so, when we're thinking about NYSERDA, it's primarily the cash rebate incentive that is paid to New York Sun approved contractors for the completion of any projects. Rob already gave the stat on the around 900 projects that are either fully completed or are fairly close to completion. But then you look at the pipeline of community solar projects and what that means. And in this new proceeding, which is referred to as the Future of Solar Roadmap, that's really where we're proposing, or NYSERDA has proposed, ideas for further supporting community solar and making sure that there's a continued growth in the market, but also making sure that that market meets the equitable goals that are laid out in the Climate Act. Specifically, 40% of benefits must go to disadvantaged communities, which is the criteria for that. That's still in the process of being defined. So with those overall big picture goals out of the way, what we really see is, there are a few key areas in which the solar program, New York Sun, believes that solar and community solar will be supported. #1 will be in the continuity of the megawatt block structure that provides those cash rebates. There's continued flexibility in allocating funds in different areas in the state, based on where we're seeing development and trying to be responsive to the needs of community members and industry. And that's the baseline level that we have in our goal for the 6 gigawatt goal through 2025, and would continue going into 2030. But what's really grown in the last few years have been the goals that are impacting disadvantaged communities. And those are some of the programs that I'm working on. There's under the umbrella term of what's referred to as the solar energy equity framework. There are a number of programs, the first of which came out last year, which was known as the Inclusive Community Solar Adder, which provides additional incentives to developers or developers of community solar projects who both dedicate a minimum capacity to low to moderate income households and disadvantaged communities, but also are guaranteeing a minimum savings amount to disadvantaged communities and to low to moderate income households. And that included the Solar for All program, which is undergoing some changes that will impact the development of community solar projects. We're hoping to make more announcements about that in the coming months. But some of the other bigger picture changes that will really impact the development of community solar going forward, and which are I hesitate to get this into a conversation about DPS, or Department of Public Service filings and notice and comment rulemaking, but we are critically seeking feedback from community organizations, from developers, and from all stakeholders on this as we make these proposals. But there's a proposal, there are a couple in place, including impacting remote crediting of community solar projects, as well as opt-out community solar that would enable more CCA adoption of community solar and would further expand community-owned, municipality-owned solar for projects. And lastly, there's continued support of the long name is, it's Program Opportunity Notice 3414, Affordable Solar and Storage Pre-Development and Technical Assistance Program. And that program is intended to provide support to owners and managers of affordable housing, to community organizations, to entities that are working closely with low to moderate income households to get community solar projects and all solar projects off the ground, provided that they have that benefit to disadvantaged communities and to low to moderate income households. There's a lot going on right now. I realize I referenced a lot of individual programs, but the biggest change is the current proceeding before DPS right now that will almost double our distributed solar target and bringing it up to 10 gigawatts, alongside other incentives that will indirectly impact including the increased energy storage targets that will have an impact on the development of distributed resources. So with that brief overview of the state programs out of the way, I'm excited to talk more with the rest of the panelists and with you, Rob and Nancy, about what you all are seeing.
Thank you, Chris. That was a great high-level overview of successes and activities across the state, especially by NYSERDA. So we look forward to continuing the conversation, and those who are listening in, then please go ahead and ask questions. We will be culling them for the Q&A later on. So at that, Luke, take it from here.
Yeah, thank you, Rob and Nancy, for hosting this discussion today, and thanks for having me on. It's a real privilege to participate with everybody here who are doing such great work. I'm from Energy Re. It's a clean energy development firm working in New York on a large project called Clean Path New York. I think to frame it up, it's not necessarily a community solar project in the way that I think a lot of us would envision it, but it's similar enough and complementary enough to the effort that I think it's appropriate to have a conversation around it. Given the existential threat of climate change that we're all facing, it's a huge enough problem that it warrants all types of solutions and everybody who's capable of getting involved in providing solutions to work together to do so. And because it's such a huge problem, on the one hand, you could argue that it requires huge projects to help solve it along the way. And that's what Clean Path New York is trying to do. It looks very similar in a lot of ways to how community solar works, in that renewable energy is going to be sent into the grid so that everybody has access to it. The big difference between the project that we're working on and some of these community solar projects is that we don't have to acquire customers who will ultimately take the power from what we're trying to do. Our power is just going to flow everywhere into Con Ed's network, and it will increase the share of renewable penetration broadly across the entire grid so that everybody receives the benefit of the clean energy that the project is delivering. So what is the project itself? It's being advanced by a partnership comprised of the New York Power Authority, which is the largest state-owned utility in the country. They own a third of the bulk transmission system in the state of New York. Another partner is called Invenergy. They're the largest privately held developer of renewable energy in the country, with a long track record of success in New York State, and us at Energy Rate. And so, what gave rise to the project? So the policy backdrop is that when the CLCPA was passed a couple of years ago, it put forth ambitious targets for the electric sector to decarbonize. Namely, we want to have 70% emissions-free power by 2030 and 100% emissions-free power by 2040. And NYSERDA is, on its face, a national and global leader in setting policy to achieve those ambitious targets, with a huge offshore wind procurement, energy storage, community solar, energy efficiency, and all the rest of it. But there was a recognition by the Public Service Commission that something needed to be done about this idiosyncratic state of the grid in New York, where it really is two grids that are sort of operating in parallel, in that upstate, it's largely emissions-free today. It's like 90% emissions-free by virtue of abundant hydroelectric power and large-scale renewables being built out across the state. Downstate, exact opposite. It was 70–80% fossil fuel driven before the closure of Indian Point, and that was all backfilled with natural gas. So the downstate grid is sort of getting dirtier in the short term, probably 90% fossil fuel driven at the moment. And so the commission decided that there was a need for NYSERDA to establish a new program called the Tier 4 Large Scale Renewable Effort, which would allow projects to come online that would deliver abundant clean energy, and couple it with a transmission solution that would allow that clean power to flow into New York City, to help decarbonize it. And so that's what our project does. And so our project is, on the one hand, on the generation side, we're building 3,800 megawatts of new wind and solar, all of which is located in the state of New York. It's 2,000 megawatts of wind, 1,800 megawatts of solar, which is just a tremendous amount of capacity. And we're coupling that with a 175-mile underground transmission line that is 1,300 megawatts in capacity, that connects Delhi, New York, in the Western Catskills, all the way into the borough of Queens. And by doing that, by adding this 1,300 megawatt transmission link, we're able to aggregate all of this 3,800 megawatts of renewables that we're developing across the state and send it directly into New York City. And when you do that, you wind up, it has ripple effects across the entire state's electric sector. So it winds up reducing the amount of fossil fuel fired generation on the electric sector by 22% every year statewide. And when you do that, you reduce the emissions associated with that generation tremendously, which brings me to like the core point of our project, is really being animated all around environmental justice and delivering health benefits and emissions benefits to frontline communities who for too long have borne the burden of the fossil fuel economy, with fossil fuel fired generation resources located in their communities. And so when you reduce emissions as drastically as our project will, you wind up delivering billions of dollars of avoided social and public health expenses that would normally be associated with emissions exposure. So we're talking about 49 million tons of carbon emissions by 2040, and 20 to 22% each reductions in criteria air pollutants like NOx, SOx, and PM 2.5, which is really sort of the scourge that drives Asthma Alley and some of the more deleterious health impacts in these communities. In the process, we create 8,300 jobs, given the scale of the project across the development and operation of both transmission and generation. And we invest $11 billion in building the project, again, all of which is contained within the state of New York. And so we think that this is a huge victory for everybody. We think that, based on our model, so just to take a step back and give the process story, we responded to an RFP in January or the NYSERDA issued a solicitation in January of last year. We responded in May. We were fortunate enough to be designated by the governor during Climate Week at the end of September. And we executed our contract with the state at the end of November, at which time NYSERDA referred our contract to the Public Service Commission for approval. And we are in the commission process right now, and we hope to be approved in March or thereabouts. And after that, we undertake a multi-year permitting process to enable us to develop this transmission link. That process is under a permitting pathway called Article 7, which is run by the state. There's a strict environmental review, community impact assessment, community engagement and outreach activities are core to the process. And we think by 2024, we'll be permitted and in construction, and our project will come online in 2027. So when that happens, we're going to wind up powering, we think, 16% of New York City's electric consumption every year. So it's just a hugely massive project with huge benefits to the community. The last thing I'll say, a couple points here. Our focus on environmental justice is shot throughout what we're trying to do. So not only are we laying off emissions in frontline communities that need it most, not only are we creating 8,300 jobs, but all of the jobs directly enabled under the project are subject to a PLA with our friends in the union world to make sure they're good paying with good benefits. On top of that, we're constituting a $270 million community investment fund focused on 4 broad pillars of engagement. One around workforce development and enabling the just transition to the new clean energy economy to create linkages and pathways between frontline communities and our project and projects like ours. Think local apprenticeship programs, think local hiring practices, and all the rest. Another pillar around education, primary, secondary, continuing ed, to inform the next generation about climate justice, energy literacy, and all of the matters that will be important for the success of the new clean energy economy. Another initiative around expanding access to healthcare in frontline communities, given the disproportionate burden that they've shouldered for too long. And a final initiative around environmental conservation and stewardship, which in our more downstate urban areas is probably going to focus largely on retrofitting affordable housing for beneficial electrification, which has its own workforce development and community reinvestment opportunity in its own right. And we think this is going to be governed by a board of directors that's comprised of project participants like us and community stakeholders who can help us understand how to allocate funding to what degree and for what purpose and what KPIs we should use to measure success. So it's a huge project. I know I talked for a long time. There's plenty more to unpack about it. But I really appreciate the opportunity to get the word out about what we're trying to do. And I'm interested in having a good discussion around it. So thank you.
Thank you, Luke. There's a lot there, exciting, ambitious project, a lot to talk about. I will transition directly to Jasmine, who will talk about the work of We Act. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Hi, everyone. I'm Jasmine Graham. I am the Energy Justice Policy Manager here at We Act for Environmental Justice. We Act is a member-based environmental justice nonprofit. We are headquartered in West Harlem, and we serve the entire Northern Manhattan community from East Harlem all the way up to Inwood. We use education, research, and advocacy to push forth more equitable solutions in the areas of climate justice, healthy homes, clean air, toxic products, sustainable land use, and more. On the solar front, we have been supporting equitable solar development in New York City for many years now. Importantly, we tend to develop and support projects that go beyond just giving folks access to community solar, but actually providing residents with opportunities to be a part of the green workforce. So I'm going to talk about three projects, the first of which is Solar Uptown Now. This was a campaign to bring Northern Manhattan HDFC or affordable co-op residents together in order to purchase solar as a group. So the goal of this project was to help give HDFC tenants an opportunity to take advantage of the benefits of renewable energy, including, of course, the reduced energy costs by using the panels to power and offset the common areas of the buildings, as well as reducing greenhouse gas emissions and helping to create good green jobs in the community. We worked with Solar One on this project, and you'll hear from Juan after. But by purchasing solar as a group, like aggregation in any other way, we were able to offer more competitive and transparent pricing, which brings the cost down for everyone. So in partnership with Solar One and we were able to identify an installer, and the outcomes were tremendous. We had 415 kilowatts of solar installed. We were able to offset 4,500 tons of greenhouse gas emissions and provide a lifetime savings for the HDFC buildings of $1.9 million, which is really huge. Thank you for that, Chris. And after I'm done talking, I'll actually drop in a video explanation that the late Cecil Corbin-Mark gave on this program, which is really great. Another program that we have is Community Power, which I think Juan will also talk about because this was a joint program with Solar One, New York City Energy Cooperative, Brooklyn Movement Center, Green City Force, and Con Ed. Community Power was a partnership that installed solar panels on the roofs of 3 NYCHA developments. It was already mentioned that it generated 1.2 megawatts of community solar across the 40 residential buildings in the 3 developments, and that the low-income households adjacent to the public housing developments were able to be enrolled in community solar and save up to 15% on their bills. Similarly, this gives environmental justice communities in both East Harlem and Brooklyn an opportunity to reap the benefits of the solar energy in terms of cost savings and climate change mitigation and jobs. NYCHA residents themselves were not allowed to offtake the solar because of NYCHA regulations, but we helped to train the installers, most of which were NYCHA residents. Studies show that people of color are more concerned about climate change than their white counterparts. And studies also show that they face the greatest impact from climate change. So we really try to marry these two things in all of the projects that we do. The last project that I'll talk about that We Act does is actually a solar installer worker-owned cooperative known as SUNS, or Solar Uptown Now Services. This is a cooperative that we incubated here at We Act, and this effort came out of a worker training program, no surprise, in partnership with Solar One, that had allowed us to train workers in solar installation, although they felt like and they experienced that they were not being hired at adequate rates despite having this solar installation training. I'm going to talk about the issue of race in the solar industry a little bit later. But they decided to form their own worker-owned cooperative in partnership with the Green Worker Cooperative in the Bronx, in order to ensure that their solar installation training actually resulted in good paying jobs. They are now installing many megawatts of solar throughout New York City and the Hudson Valley region. And they have project labor agreements that allow them to have prevailing wages. So with that context of what we do and why, it's important to note that right now, community solar and pretty much all solar development in New York City is effectively stalled because a downstate incentive known as the community credit has been exhausted. And without its replenishment, it's not financially viable to build solar projects in New York City where the costs are very high. However, community solar provides an even greater benefit in New York City than in other areas of the state, which is something that Luke touched on. New York City's local energy grid is significantly more dependent on fossil fuels than upstate regions, where they have plenty of space to build renewables. And Luke, you were pretty much accurate with your assessment. Right now, 85% of New York City's electricity grid is powered by dirty energy, whereas 88% of the upstate grid is already powered by clean energy sources. So it could not be a more stark contrast. And additionally, with approximately 50% of New York's low-income population residing in New York City, it is absolutely clear that this is an environmental justice issue. Community solar is incredibly important in reducing our local greenhouse gas emissions, and it's a very effective tool in reducing household energy burdens, which is the amount of someone's income that is spent on heating, cooling, and powering their home. And downstate, where we are centered in New York City, energy burdens are extremely high, and this disparity is even greater when you account for race. So 33% of Black households in New York City and 32% of Hispanic households have a high energy burden. Even more than that, among low-income households, 1 in 4 has a severely high energy burden greater than 17%, meaning that 17% of their income is spent on powering their homes. Overall, over 1.5 million people in New York City are energy cost burdened. And so community solar is one avenue and a really important one to reduce energy bills and therefore reduce energy burden. However, at WeAct, we are acutely aware of the tendency of energy industries to exclude communities of color. And the solar industry is absolutely not unique on that front. A 2020 US Energy and Employment Report found that only 8% of solar workers are Black. It is also a heavily male-dominated industry, with 70% of the workforce being men. And even more so, when you look at the executive leadership of US solar firms, it's found that they are 80% male and almost 88% white. So this lack of diversity leads to disparities in the locations where solar is developed and who benefits. Majority white neighborhoods have 21% more solar panels installed on their rooftops than communities of color. So this is something that we seriously need to contend with as policymakers, as solar developers, installers, and advocates. If we replicate the same injustices that the fossil fuel industry has done, if we replicate the same power and wealth hoarding, then we are no better. We have to find a way to include equity, energy justice, and democratic solutions into our solar development. And as Chris mentioned, the state recently released the 10 gigawatt solar roadmap, which lays out the plans for continued incentives for the solar industry. We are incredibly grateful that NYSERDA is working hard to incentivize and drive solar development in New York. The report was long awaited and had a lot of beneficial aspects, but fell short on the equity component, the Solar Energy Equity Framework, or SEEF. So this part of the roadmap actually doesn't meet the CLCPA goals for 40% of the benefits going to disadvantaged communities. And we don't see any incentives or carve outs for community wealth building through ownership. Our communities are so often exploited for wealth and are given scraps to make up for it. We know that we cannot meet our climate goals when excluding significant portions of our community. And as I said before, we know that communities of color are more at risk to the negative effects of climate change. So I'm actually going to drop a link to the roadmap after I'm done speaking, which you should all read so that you can see NYSERDA's approach to furthering solar development. I will say the report is over 100 pages, so beware and set aside a lot of time. But it is, a comprehensive look at the way that the state is thinking about this. And comments are due on March 7th. And it is important for all communities, not just the wealthy ones, not just the well-resourced ones, to have a say in the future of solar development here in New York. So we hope to continue to work with NYSERDA, work with, of course, Solar One, which we work with all the time, work with Luke, and continue to advance energy justice in the solar industry and beyond. And I will go ahead and pass it to our next speaker.
Thank you, Jasmine. That was a fantastic overview and really illuminating the disparities that exist between race across the country and in the city is very important to maintain front and center as a part of the conversation. So at that, I would like to transition to Juan and do want to keep time in mind. So we have time for 1 to 2 questions. So Juan, if you can keep to about 8 to 9 minutes, then we have time for a question or 2 at the end. Thank you.
Sounds good. Can you all hear me? Okay. Yeah, and we definitely want to keep working with WEACT. My name is Juan. I'm from Solar One. I'm the director of community solar there. Solar One, we're an environmental education nonprofit based out of New York City. And we have a bunch of different programs that seek to connect New Yorkers to the conversation around sustainability, resiliency, and the urban environment, mostly through education and resources. The program that I work on is called Here Comes Solar. And what we do is provide technical assistance to New Yorkers that are looking to get solar energy. And so historically, we would work with New York City homeowners and cooperatives, such as the Solar Uptown Now project that Jasmine mentioned. And we would walk, in the case of a co-op, we would walk the board through the process of getting solar on their roof and provide them with the education, answer questions, hook them up with an installer, and just monitor the process as they go along. And then we started working on more community solar projects. And the essence of our work remains the same, where we're providing the technical assistance, but it's just a different type of project. With community solar projects, when we're co-developing them, we do that all in the spirit of partnership. And so I describe our work at Solar One as, if you ever watch like Ocean's 11 or a bank heist movie, and there's someone who's like recruiting all the different people that are going to be involved, that's Solar One. We pride ourselves on being experts in solar. We're solar nerds, but we have to recruit the experts in development, in financing, in outreach, in community engagement, in workforce development, and so on and so forth. And so I'm going to highlight one of the projects that we worked on over the last, it started a while ago, but really most of the work in the development sense was over the last 1.5 years or so, which we're calling Community Power. Community Power is a community solar project that was a total of 1.2 megawatts spread across 3 NYCHA campuses. And those 3 NYCHA campuses had altogether 40 buildings that installed solar energy. So in essence, it was 40 unique solar projects on 3 NYCHA campuses. And the campuses were Northern Manhattan, the Carver campus, and 2 in Central Brooklyn, Kingsborough and Glenwood. Community Power also exclusively recruited low and moderate income households from the areas around the NYCHA campuses And when it was all said and done, we managed to recruit about 500 low and moderate income households, plus a wait list of people that wanted to sign up. We also partnered with Green City Force and WeAct to include a workforce component. And so the installer that we chose, which was Accord Power, agreed to have 15 what we called green apprentices on the job to receive paid on the job. Basically, it was employment for this project that lasted almost a year. But it was in consultation with WeAct and Green City Force for the recruitment, and Green City Force did a lot of like the supporting wraparound services during the installation. I feel like sometimes when I describe this project, it's like when people win awards and it's like, I have to list all the partners because this was really a true community partnership effort. And it was a combination of a few different efforts, which was NYCHA putting together their Access Solar program to make their rooftops available for solar leases. And then Con Edison also had a REV demonstration project where they wanted to test out new models for low and moderate income households to access new energy projects that can help them afford their energy bills. And then we also recruited Co-op Power to be our development partner for this project. And through their New York City Community Energy Cooperative, they're building the first energy cooperative in New York with the low and moderate income households that are part of this project. And that cooperative is going to be a self-sustaining, self-governed group of individuals who can pool their resources to develop more energy projects in their communities. A few kind of lessons that we have from this. On the development side, oh, and of course we have WeAct and BMC on the outreach side of it as well. And so, as Jasmine mentioned, we initially did a lot of community-based outreach in Northern Manhattan and Central Brooklyn, where we use all types of different tactics to make people aware and sign up for this project as well. A few of the lessons learned real quickly. On the development side, we learned that we really needed a lot of access to capital in the beginning stages of the project to fund a lot of these early development activities, such as designs, the Caesar study, and even to mobilize for outreach. And some of that was able to be accomplished through our partnership with Con Edison for the REV demonstration project, but some of it was funding that we had to kind of scramble for. And this is something that's critical, especially for community-based development projects who don't have the deeper pockets and who are possibly doing this for the first time. And then one other thing that we found that was really beneficial with this project is that we were able to offer a 20% discount because of a combination of a few different things. And by the way, for community solar, the standard is a 10% discount. We were able to take advantage of a few of NYSERDA's incentives, including the affordable housing community solar incentive of $1.15 a watt to help drive down some of our costs. And NYCHA also provided a preferential lease payment. And so it was lower than the market rate payment so that we were able to then turn around that savings in a sense into a higher benefit for the subscribers. And both of these are things that I think we can continue to incorporate to scale up a project like this, using generous incentives to drive down the cost of development, and also encouraging lower costs on the lease end of things through either preferential leases or through the incentives themselves. And preferential leases is something that public entities are uniquely positioned to do. And we see New York doing this not just with this project, but another project, Sunset Park Solar, that's being developed in Sunset Park as well. And that's Uprose that's leading that project there. On the customer enrollment side, like I mentioned, we enrolled over 500 low and moderate income households to this project. And the eligibility requirements were that you're below the 80% AMI mark, that you were a Con Edison customer, and that you were comfortable with the auto pay component with community solar. And we had no problem with the first two, but the third one was a sticking point for some of the customers that we were trying to recruit. And what we learned, we had a lot of lessons learned from the outreach, but keeping in mind that we also did outreach during COVID. And so it's difficult to do the type of outreach that we originally envisioned. And so we had our kickoff meeting in February of 2020. And I remember Cecil and some other WEAC folks came to the office and we were like, should we shake hands right now? And a week later, 2 weeks later, the world shut down. And we originally envisioned doing this with full community outreach and going to households and going to low and moderate income developments and doing the outreach in their community spaces. And we had to switch to everything being digital. And so we did recruit a significant amount of subscribers to the community outreach. But then we had a lot of our subscribers come from the utility who did outreach on their side. And we had a lot of interest being driven through the Con Edison's outreach. And that's something they did because, again, we were in partnership with them for this project. We had a lot of feedback on, okay, I'll wrap up in 10 seconds then, on community solar for LMI. But in general, what we found was that people did trust, obviously, WEACT and BMC on the outreach side. They trusted the Con Ed logo when Con Edison did their outreach. And so I personally think that a combination of the community outreach with like a seal of approval from Con Edison will be really, would really make this feel official to LMI customers. And we also found that a streamlined process that limits credit checks. We didn't have credit checks, we just looked at old bills. And a streamlined process that pre-qualifies customers and doesn't ask for additional documentation was really, really important in getting people to sign up. So I'll stop there and I'll turn it over to Rob for questions.
Thank you, Juan. We have just a couple minutes. I'd like to jump in, and Juan was right on the learning lessons component, and I'd like to pull out a question from actually a former professor of mine, own good friend. And I'd like to direct this to Jasmine and Chris. He asks, it sounds like there are a lot of initiatives underway. This all sounds good, but it's probably not enough and not too soon. And Luke, you can jump in here as well. So for each of you, what is one thing specifically do we need to do to move programs even faster and more broadly? Juan, I didn't pick on you because you already called out a lot of learning lessons. I'd like to hear from you three. Who would like to go first? Everyone has about a minute.
I'll try to kind of combine a few things in one, because I did see someone else talk about hosting capacity and interconnection. I want to say that NYPA, the New York Power Authority that Luke mentioned, is really well positioned to do that kind of transmission and infrastructure build out to increase hosting capacity. There is a bill, the Build Public Renewables Act, that we are lobbying for really hard in the legislature right now, that would, enable NYPA to do more of that. I think from an equity standpoint, we need incentives. The solar roadmap, it provides a lot of incentives, but a lot of those go to, well, virtually all of them go to, the solar industry, and less so to the people in terms of supporting cooperatives and making sure that there are carve outs for community owned renewable energy. So I think the thing that WEACT really needs is to make sure that incentives are inclusive of different ownership models.
Thank you, Jasmine. Chris.
So I was thinking about it from two lenses. So there's, I think from the NYSERDA perspective, because we administer incentives, the easiest way to say is more incentives, but it's not just more incentives, it's it's more nuanced because you could, if everything was increased in how it is, that doesn't mean that it would achieve equitable goals. And so there has to be, if I guess answering the question of what could make projects go be completed faster. You know, if we increase the incentives for commercial and industrial scale upstate projects, we could increase the capacity that is installed in the state faster, and that would get to both 6 gigawatts and 10 gigawatts. But you know, as Luke mentioned, where you're talking about different electricity grids in different areas of the state, you know, you're not reducing pollution in the areas you know, the most by building more larger upstate projects, even though that will be part of the portfolio, unless there's a way that we can move those electrons to areas that are downstate. So it's not just increasing the incentives, there's a reallocation component of it, and you know, there's creating new ones where they did not exist. I would say a large part of this current proceeding with the Future of Solar roadmap is to get as many comments. It's critically important that we get more comments on areas where it is both insufficient and sufficient. And so that's, you know, what Jasmine is mentioning, she's talking directly to the areas where it's insufficient. And that's, you know, from the NYSERD perspective, we need more feedback on where it should be pushed. And that way we will see more projects get built, both equitably and just more overall.
Thank you, Chris. And Luke, in 60 seconds, what's one area to get your job done faster? Very easy question for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's two areas to focus. One is it's incredibly difficult to permit these large transmission facilities. And I think that there's a way to properly expedite the Article 7 process in a way that maintains the centrality of community outreach and engagement and environmental review without eroding any of the value or the effort put into those initiatives, while also tightening up and streamlining the process overall so that you could just get this done much more rapidly. And some of it, I think, has to do with properly resourcing, you know, the offices involved in getting these permits approved and executed. And then at the other side, you know, the NYSO, which is the grid operator, does a tremendous job keeping the lights on, keeping the system flowing. But there's a huge deluge of applications for interconnection of renewable facilities across the state. And I think, you know, there's probably a conversation worth having around how to help the NYSO deal with the huge volume of clean energy projects that need to come online and get interconnected in a really tight time frame in order for all of us to achieve the goals we want to achieve.
Thank you, Luke. There have been amazing questions in the Q&A. We're going to take them, copy and paste them, and anybody from the panel that's interested in answering, we can actually put together a little Q&A. I think there's just so much great interest and information that has been synthesized. Nancy, do you want to put in a quick last word for all of us?
I want to thank our panelists, and I also want to thank our attendees who have remained with us throughout this 4-star conversation. Chris, I want to thank you all, but Chris's point about the role of public participation. I spent many years in government, and it actually matters. Public participation really moves that needle and really changes that Overton window of what's possible, what's doable, and what we can achieve. So thank you all.
At that, thank you. And we look forward to keeping the conversation going above and beyond this panel. So feel free to connect. We will be, as Nancy said, we will be posting this on YouTube, a link along with a link to the The proposed policy for public comment will be sent along as well.
And we hope to see you all in March for the second panel in this series. You'll be hearing from us.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.